This episode contains discussions of abuse, violence, and loss that some listeners may find distressing. Please take care whilst listening. There is a moment after stories like this where everything goes quiet. Not because nothing remains, but because everything has already been said. This is Hidden Chronicles. I'm Jenny. I love history and I am fascinated by the moments where human psychology collides with it in the worst possible ways. In this series, we explore crime through context rather than spectacle. I ask not just what happened, but what kind of world made it possible. In the last episode, we reached the point where everything changed. The investigation, the discovery. The moment where what had been hidden could no longer remain that way. Now we move into what followed. What followed was not only reflection, it was action. As the reality of what had been uncovered became clear, a formal investigation began to take shape. What had once been fragments was now evidence. And that evidence required response. Both Fred West and Rose West were arrested as part of that investigation. Their arrests marked a shift from uncovering what had happened to formally addressing it. And that process matters. Because it is the point where something hidden becomes part of the justice system, where it is examined, challenged, and ultimately recognised in law. As the investigation progressed, charges were brought. Serious charges, including multiple counts related to murder and offences connected to the abuse that had taken place. And those charges are important, not only because of what they represent legally, but because of what they acknowledge. They recognise that what happened was not isolated. It was not minor, but sustained, serious, and deserving of formal accountability. And within that process, something else happens. The story moves beyond the house, beyond the discovery, and into a wider understanding. One where what took place is no longer hidden, but formally recognised. And after that, the silence returns. But it is not the same silence, because now it carries weight. The aftermath of cases like this is not defined only by the events, but also by impact. And that impact exists on different levels. For the families, there is unimaginable loss. Not just of a person who they loved and cherished, but also of time of moments that should have existed and now can't, of futures that were never fully realised. And that kind of loss does not end with an investigation finishing. It continues through absence, through memory, through the reality of what should have been but is no longer possible. And it is important that these things are discussed because they do matter. Because when we talk about aftermath, we are not talking about something that has ended. We are talking about something that continues. For the communities, there is a different kind of impact. A shift in how safety is understood. A recognition that something serious can exist within something that appears ordinary. And that changes how people see the world around them. It creates questions about what was missed, about what could have been seen sooner, if anything, and about how something like this was able to continue and remain hidden for so long. And those questions really matter, not because they always have clear answers, but because they help shape what happens next. For those involved in the investigation, there is another kind of impact. The weight of what was uncovered. The process of bringing something hidden into the open. And the responsibility of ensuring that what was found was understood and acknowledged. Because recognition is part of justice. Not just in legal terms, but in human terms. And then there is something else. Something far less visible. The impact on how stories like this are remembered. Because once something becomes known, it becomes part of history. And how it is told matters. Because sometimes it can be reduced without meaning for that to happen. Sometimes it can be simplified, again, without meaning for that to happen. And sometimes it can be turned into something it was never meant to be. And that is why reflection is so very important. Because without it, we risk losing what actually matters. The people, the reality, and the impact. And in stories like this is what should remain at the very centre. Not just what happened, but who it happened to and what it meant. Because when we focus only on events, we lose something very important. But when we hold on to the human impact, we can remember it properly. And remembering properly matters because it shapes how we understand the past and how we can respond in the present. And perhaps most importantly, how we recognise things in the future. Because stories like this do not only exist in history, they exist in patterns, in environments, in the way vulnerability can be overlooked or misunderstood. And that is where reflection becomes something more. Not just looking back, but looking forward. Understanding what made something possible, so that it can be recognised if it begins to happen again. And that is where this story leaves us. Not with a clear ending, but with something to hold on to. Awareness, accountability, responsibility, and the understanding that what happened should never be reduced to something simple. Because it was not. It was complex. It was serious. And very deeply human. Thank you for listening. Until next time, be gentle with what history leaves behind.